Thank you. Good morning, everyone. All right, good. That was a sound check. I got to say something and it worked. Uh, Thank you all for being here, for getting up early. I hope you're caffeinated, although I'll try to keep you going. Thank you for a brief bio. It's been a fun 25 years since I've been involved in this energy space. I'll mention a couple of other biographical facts about myself where they're relevant to the talk or they serve as bragging as necessary. But by and large, just what you need to know is that I've had a wonderful time for the last 25 years working on trying to improve the sustainability of energy in our use in the United States and in many places around the world. I'm a tad bit nervous today because, of course, I have to follow Amory Lovins, and I'm going to cue up the first slide to make, oh, sorry, go back. There we go. I was looking for the monitor, and it wasn't quite the same. Can you guys put the center screen on the comfort monitor? There you go, thanks. But the good news is that a lot of what they said set me up for what I wanted to say today, so that makes me feel smarter already. What I want to talk to you about today is the electric utility industry. It's relevant, as nerdy as it sounds, because it's the largest and most polluting industry on the face of the earth. And that if we can make it more sustainable, we can go a long way towards solving the problems of climate change that are facing our world. It is a mission, I believe, that many of you are already embarked upon, but there is more we can all do. So I'm going to share with you a little of what I think you need to know in order to do more in this effort. It's about leadership, therefore, so I just better start with a definition. This is my three-part definition of what leadership is, and depending on where you are, any one of the parts may be most important. To be a leader, though, you have to play a role in crafting an agenda, setting the stage of work for people to engage in, and it has to be backed up by that vision thing. Second, you have to figure out, and this is perhaps the most challenging part of leadership, how to convene people around that agenda, and then you can't just leave them alone. You have to support them in accomplishing it. So that's my sort of bias, my definitional bias, what I think about in terms of what leadership is. Now, if I'm successful today, I will spark a little bit more interest in you doing more leadership in clean energy. It doesn't have to be challenging. Your leadership can be manifest in driving the adoption of energy efficiency investments, in supporting the installation of solar facilities or other distributed generation facilities, in designing resilient microgrids around your campuses and in your communities. But it can also be manifest in teaching the lessons of sustainability to friends and colleagues, to students and neighbors. It can be an act of speech. It can be as simple as screwing in a light bulb. The one condition is that in order to be leadership, it must engage another person. Now, you know why we're here. I can add nothing to what Bill went through with you last night about the need for leadership and the need for change in the world around us. What I can do is point out the connection. And Bill mentioned last night, one of the major, in fact, the major source of greenhouse gases is the electric utility industry and its burning of fossil fuels. Of all the drivers for change and solving the climate change problem, then, none is greater than getting our electric service industry off of fossil fuels. Climate change is therefore the biggest driver for change in the industry. And as wonderful and as essential as electricity is, it's enabling all this that we're doing right now. The simple truth is that for over a century, our electric system has found its success and its affordability in using the atmosphere as a free dump for carbon dioxide and many other pollutants. The existing model cannot continue in a world of climate responsibility. It must change. Fortunately for us, there's a number of other drivers that are coalescing with the climate imperative, that are finally producing some real change in the electric utility industry. These include low natural gas prices, driven ironically by fracking, which may be another great environmental threat and in fact contributes to climate change, but also by the improving economics of renewable energy, both large and small, by advancements in grid management technologies, and of course, by a ubiquitous, seemingly, I think, inexhaustible supply of energy efficiency and energy management resources. As Bill said last night, this will be a change that occurs primarily in the distribution system, at the customer end of the electric business. And that's why it's such a powerful leadership opportunity for each of you, because it's a change that can be helped by action from the bottoms up. Combine that with these forces from the top, your action from the bottom. As an old cavalry officer, I recognize a classic pincer move. It's the only way we're going to succeed. So let's load up those two side slides for me, and there we go. What I want to do is perhaps offer you a little bit of a metaphor for the change that we have to undertake. And again, Bill helped me last night by talking about the differences between how we shop at a supermarket and shop at a farmer's market. My idea was to go a little bit further than this, so I start at the concept of the company store. Now, if you've seen a company store today, it's probably a quaint historical reminder. A weird version of it has become Cracker Barrel restaurants, I think. But at any rate, and they're quaint and they're fun, and maybe you can get some local crafts and you can wax nostalgic for a wonderful time. But it wasn't that wonderful, and the company store was not about goodness and community. A company store was an instrument of economic domination and control. Think about it. You can work long hours if you don't have your own garden to tend. The company can recycle wages into revenues by selling you the food and other supplies that you need. And they can sell it to you just as you earn the money, and maybe even before, so that you and your entire family can be bound into the servitude of those obligations. Competition is really hard when the company owns the general store. Having a company store is what economists call extracting monopoly rents. Economic domination, economic control. Sadly, that is exactly how many electric utilities today, including some in North Carolina, see their role. They will be your sole provider of electricity. They will decide what products you buy and what price you pay. Transformation driven by the distributed end of the system, like the community garden, like the co-op store, like the farmer's market. Change driven at the distribution end of the system offers monopoly-breaking empowerment. Customers can be producers, merging into prosumers, and the environment on a global and local scale can benefit. When we look at the electric utility system, When we look at the electric utility system to figure out what this change is going to look like, these diagrams are somewhat representative. On this side, we see an electric utility system in its conventional form. Large central station power plants producing energy in the gigawatt hours, shoving it down big wires to smaller wires to smaller wires where we drink it by the watt. There's a lot of spillage and waste in that process, as I'll talk about in a moment. This dumb one-way electron delivery system produces the demand for huge amounts of capital. It is a financial engine of the likes we've never seen before. It encourages bigger and biggering and biggering until we can no longer bigger anymore. The transformation, which I believe is inevitable, will require a shift to a more web-like structure, from one-to-one to many. Our grid will be a mesh. We will all be interconnected, and it will require the application of many disciplines of science, management, analysis, We'll have to change our land use and planning, real estate law. We'll have to adopt advanced information management systems and learn what a mesh net is and build self-healing networks driven by distributed generation and energy management and storage. It will change our communities, it will change our buildings, and it will change our habits, but all for the better if we're engaged. In moving from that dumb one-way electron delivery system to an interconnected, intelligent network of distributed technologies such as wind and solar and storage and biodigesters and electric vehicles and smart thermostats and energy management systems and much more, there is so much for students and researchers and professors and graduates and activists to work on. It will be an ideal endeavor for a university community. Getting there, though, may not be easy. In fact, we can imagine several pathways, and we see them emerging in various parts of the country already. In many states, traditional monopoly utilities that covet their monopolistic control and profits will see distributed resources as a threat, and they will respond with resistance. They may whisper the siren song, "Do nothing, let's study this a little bit longer. It's okay, the status quo has been working for so long." They might argue for a measured or incremental approach, but with coal plants daily spewing millions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we don't have time for incrementalism. We could go to the legislature for comprehensive change, but that would be a mistake, in some states more than others. So where change is happening for the good, where we're starting to embrace this model like my new home state, current home state in New York, it's driven by regulatory bodies. And where it's really effective, those regulators are supported by activists, by ground-level troops and businesses who see an opportunity in this new environment, who are teaming together again in that classic pincer movement. If we are successful, we will see the emergence of a wide range of options. We will have choices, and we will have to, by ourselves or through agents who are more than willing to provide the service, make decisions. But we will have control over that destiny. We will be the ones able to decide how best to use our energy in a way that is not only cost-effective, but also responsible. We can feel good about ourselves. So with the stage set about what's possible in the transformation of the monopoly utility systems built around central power plants to a more distributed network, I want to talk to you about three core concepts that I think are important as you embark on this kind of sustainability effort or any others. Those concepts are, first, the concept of value. We have to make sure that what we do is worth it. Second, we have to constantly embrace the principle of systems thinking. And then finally, I want to remind you about universality and the power of our connections to each other. I want to start talking about value first because of an article that I read just the other day. It seems like some utility experts in North Carolina are starting to use the term peak solar to describe the solar industry market in your state. I was astounded, as you might be, to learn that some people think we just can't afford to put any more solar in North Carolina. Well, careful reading, by the way, students, learn critical thinking. Careful reading of the article revealed that in a very few places in North Carolina, the utility might have to spend some money to upgrade the local distribution system to accommodate all the solar that customers and private investors want to install. So, putting in a lot of solar requires a little bit of spending in updating the grid. The technical response to that is, duh, right? But that's not the point what's wrong about the article is extrapolating, the cynical nature in which you extrapolate this concept of the need to spend a little bit of money in a couple of places into an argument that solar needs to be stopped in the state of North Carolina or anywhere else. So in this regard, it's important that I teach you the first lesson about value. This mathematical formula, hopefully, is easy to understand. Value, price, and cost are not the same thing. If you have trouble remembering, I'll offer you my favorite mnemonic device. I remember the best joke that was never told. This is the joke that, of course, on the way to the moon, Neil Armstrong said, "I hope the lowest bidder didn't get the contract." Right? He didn't say it, but God, wouldn't that have been cool? I mean, come on, one small step, that nerds like me would have loved. I hope the lowest bidder didn't get the contract. All right, he didn't say it, but the point is, if you're traveling through space in a spaceship or on spaceship Earth, totally dependent on your environmental services, you really don't want to go with the cheapest, lowest price option, because the cost of failure is way too high. You want the value option. And that's what we want to talk about in the concept of bringing value to thinking about electricity. That was what the trade press story missed. The utility was saying it might cost us at the utility some money if there was more solar installed. But nowhere in the article I read did they discuss the idea of what more solar might be worth to North Carolina. When I was a utility executive in Austin, at the Austin Energy, I actually had to get more solar installed. That was what my board of directors, the town council, the city council, told me was my mission. In order to do so, I realized I would have to shift my focus from utility cost to community value. I knew that we had to spend some money to integrate solar into our system, but what I wanted to know was what solar was worth. From a utility perspective, that meant I needed to learn not just the costs, but the benefits, or the costs that were avoided. Ultimately, that led to the development of a new kind of utility tariff, a rate, in which I could fully and fairly compensate my solar generating customers, and they would fairly pay for their share of the grid that we were maintaining for them. The idea is not entirely new. For me, it goes back to this wonderful slide produced by eSource, a spinoff from RMI many years ago. It's absolutely required learning in my energy law class at Pace. It simply makes for looking from left to right the rather sad story that our electricity system is extremely inefficient. 100 units of input energy only end up giving us about 10 units of valuable work at the end of the process. And the sad thing about our utility system is that every bit of the waste along the way represents huge capital investment and profit to the incumbent utility. But here is the lesson to be learned. Looking backwards, if you will, from right to left, is the opportunity that with each unit of energy savings or distributed generation, you can avoid 10 units of coal at the left-hand side of the graph. In finance, we call that leverage. And the power at the distributed end suggests that we can accumulate savings by working at the bottom end, savings that accrue all along that system. So, with that in mind, we can start taking apart the electric rate itself and the value that a solar generation or any other distributed resource brings. We can separate that kilowatt hour of energy into avoided environmental costs and distribution costs and energy costs and operating and maintenance costs, and analyze those against what the utility would have had to pay. And in this example taken from Minnesota, where we actually put value of solar into the law, the resulting number is that solar is worth more than the retail rate that the utility charges for electricity, brown electricity, climate vulnerable electricity delivered to your home or business. That lesson of value is what enabled our utility and can enable utilities to partner with customers to see the benefits. And already this thinking about value is changing the way we're approaching distributed resources. It's become a driver for looking at more community and shared solar optimally sited into congested parts of the grid to encourage remote net metering for the same reason. To start prospecting for locational value, advancing the interests of storage, putting trackers on solar panels, and using solar that's backed up by smarter inverters so they can also provide ancillary services benefits. And it sets the stage for the rest of our distributed energy resources, the other 4 S's besides the S of solar: savings and storage and security and smarts, all of which have that same distributed value. Getting into the value of solar, therefore, turned out to be a key that opened up an exciting opportunity. The next example I want to talk to you about is the concept of systems thinking. In this regard, I'll get to this picture in just a moment, but I want to talk about the values of the demonstrated in the side pictures on this one first. This is a similar picture to a situation I faced when I first became a public utility commissioner in Texas. We bought a house, and it was, to be quite honest with you, an energy hog. We needed a new air conditioner right about the time that a hailstorm took out our roof. They don't pay commissioners much, and we couldn't afford both. Luckily, I had a chance to interact with green building experts who suggested that instead of a typical asphalt roof, I put on a metal roof, and then I separate it from the radiant barrier facing upwards with some wooden lath to create a ventilation and cooling space. After doing that, we had the auditors come in to size for the air conditioner, and we were able to go from a 5-ton unit to a 4-ton unit because of the savings associated with the cooler roof. 20-some years later, that roof is still there. We drove by not too long ago to look at the house in Austin. Saving those people money, the savings on that air conditioner more than paid for the small upcharge on the roof, and I learned a valuable lesson in systems thinking. So later on, when I'm back in Austin at Austin Energy, I was managing all our energy efficiency programs. This thing in the middle, the load duration curve, is basically how power demand changes over the course of a day. Typical southern air conditioning environment with winter peaking, you have a slightly different shape, but generally they're the same. There are periods of high demand and periods of low demand. And we tuned our energy efficiency programs to attack that peak. But I had a crazy question. How does this work with the idea of our emissions? So I got the analysts working on it, and we plotted our emissions, our carbon duration curve, and learned something really remarkable. You see, we were a coal-based utility. So when all the other plants weren't working, in the middle of the night, we were running almost entirely on coal at that time, unless you were a green power customer. That meant that as the demand for electricity went up, the carbon intensity of our electricity actually went down, because we added more gas into the mix as the demand for electricity went up. We also had this weird little bump around 10 a.m. when the natural gas plants started, because they were cold and less efficient until they got warmed up and running 30 or 45 minutes later. We actually had an increase in pollution, especially NOx pollution, by the way, which is a precursor for ozone and smog. So what did I learn by asking how does emissions go according to the electricity stuff? Well, that's the last slide over there. That's the lessons. The first lesson was that if you have an electric vehicle, because I also got the opportunity to put in the electric vehicle charging network in Austin, if you have an electric vehicle, that you're filling up on dirtier electricity if you charge at night. But we didn't want people charging during the day, so priority number one became making sure our electric vehicle customers were green power customers, so they'd fill up on wind power at night. And the second lesson was that there was real value in moving towards workplace charging so that we could start reducing that little bump in the early morning, take advantage of morning sunshine to top off electric vehicles when they got to the office. That kind of systems thinking really paid off in optimizing our energy efficiency programs. And the results, surprising if they were, actually seemed to make sense. So now I want to go to my last big lesson, the concept of universality and connection. Let's start with this little diagram of a fictitious campus, a community, a neighborhood, some area of focus. Now, in the early days of electrification and telephone service, we realized that where people concentrated, service is inexpensive because of infrastructure costs. But there was already demand for serving customers in rural locations. And one of the ideas we realized is that, in fact, it's not just cost. There may be some value in connecting customers. Imagine the early days of telephone service. If the farmer's feeling sick when he gets up in the morning, or she doesn't know what this headache is all about, he has to stop what they're doing and drive into town or hitch up the horse and go into town, disrupt the doctor's schedule and find out if it's anything serious. But by extending a telephone line, that same farmer can pick up the phone, describe their systems, go through a simple system of triage, and find out whether or not they need to stop work or just take 2 aspirins and call the doctor in the morning. Society as a whole benefits from connecting that customer to the network. And in fact, the concept also works with ideas like negawatts. The energy inefficiency in a remote customer's home can be just as valuable as the energy efficiency in yours. We just need to have a network and a connection in order to harvest it. So now take the idea to the next stage and remember that your community is already connected to communities around you, communities of apartments and houses and neighborhoods that house employees and students and businesses, and also a lot of DER potential. Now, we know from the revolution in distributed energy that we're going to start getting more distributed generation, and if we're smart, we can draw a line around that and our customer uses. We can create the ability to operate as an island in cases of disaster and create a shelter-in-place opportunity at the campus, perhaps, if we want to, with a resilient microgrid. But what I want you to do is to think about your connections and universality, this principle of us all being connected to each other. Take it a step further. Think hard about the opportunities that you can get from also connecting to other features in your community. I dream of a day when your HR program, your benefits program, or your student tuition programs include benefits that allow off-campus students and off-campus employees to participate in energy efficiency, improving the load diversity, because diversity is good in electricity just like everywhere else. Improving the resilience of your grid, giving you more options, more bargaining power in procuring resources and establishing programs. Think of the way we are connected and think of the opportunities that go along with that. All right, so that's the principle of universality. Now, I want to just close out with 2 quick ideas. The first one is that if you were like me, Bill McKibben does bum you out a little bit. I mean, he inspires you and charges you up, but you do have to kind of go through that low period. So I'm constantly looking for ways for understanding how we can deal with this. I'm a policy geek, and the best I ever found was Frank Ackerman's Climate Economics in 4 Easy Pieces. If you haven't read it, please do. This is my version of it. There are just 4 principles you need to understand, and you can talk about with your neighbors about why we need to get serious about climate today and do something about our electricity system today. The very first one has to do with discount rates. Most of you, I'm sure you all understand the idea of discount rates. The idea is that when it comes to looking at investments, things in the future are worth less than things today. We discount the future. In fact, the joke in environmental economics is that on a discounted cash flow basis, the world is not worth saving. Typical utilities use a weighted average cost of capital that runs in the 6 to 8%, meaning that the value of any investment today is worth half in just 10 years. And the mistake we make is applying those same kind of corporate discount rates to important things like my beautiful granddaughter Avery and my new grandson Jonathan. So I think of my grandchildren as reminding me that they are not worthless just because they will be living in the future. In fact, they are worth more. We need to set our discount rates appropriately for the investments we make to deal with climate change, including all those distributed resources that I talked about. Second, insurance is worth buying. I don't believe my house is going to burn down. You don't believe your house is going to burn down. But if there's a fire at our house, it could be catastrophic, not just for us, but for our entire community. And so we require, with reason and logic, that homeowners carry fire insurance. It's worth paying for a little fire insurance against the calamity that is climate change. Third, while we're really good with numbers, if you haven't read Natural Capitalism, I can tell you now the core principle is that all our wealth, all our welfare, all our happiness, all our well-being derives from natural capital. And though we might slap a number on it for cases, situations like environmental litigation, it is beyond measure. It is of infinite worth because it is what sustains us. And if we have to take numerical shortcuts to evaluate environmental benefits, just remember, you're always wrong. You're always undervaluing the natural capital on which we depend. And then finally, the fourth principle is we're gonna spend the money. There are good things to spend money on and bad things to spend money on. This green building that I used here as an example, it reminds me that if we can spend the money on the good things, we'll be doing better. Another example, if you're in a low-income urban neighborhood, the community can spend money on mass transit and electric buses. Or it can spend money on emergency rooms, asthma medicine, and nebulizers. You're gonna spend the money. What do you want to spend your money on? So with those four ways of thinking, you can approach this big problem and check the reasonableness of your plans, actions, or those that are proposed to you. And you can be a logical member of the argument about how it is that we can embrace responsibility for climate. You know, at one point, with that pathways slide that I had earlier on, I was thinking about saying to you at this stage, well, you really have pathways too. You can do nothing. You can go backwards or you can move forwards. But I've had a chance to meet some of you, and I realize that doing nothing and going backwards is not an option. So instead, I just want to share with you one final thought, and that is my most sort of accessible definition of sustainable development. Because after all, that's what we all have as a mission. The Brundtland definition is good and it's right, but I think that if we simply, and our neighbors simply, and our friends and businesses simply internalize the second definition, I think we can all be leaders in sustainable development, because I really do believe there'll be a tomorrow. I look at Avery, I know that. I look at you, I know that. And that makes me want to do the right thing. I know you do too. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. So, I think we have time for questions. Did I actually leave a few minutes for questions? And do you want to use those bouncy microphone things, Jed? You can throw me one. I want to try that. I'd let you holler out, but I don't know if they're recording. If anybody does have questions. I see one back there. Do you want to try hollering? Okay. Right. Right, that's a good question. Yeah, no, I said it kind of fast. It's the carbon intensity. So it's carbon cumulative average per marginal kilowatt hour, right? In fact, the gross amount of emissions could well go up. But what I was trying to point to is that for that marginal reduction in energy use, you're getting less carbon bang for your buck. I'll give you a really good example. No utility person running an energy efficiency program in their right mind would deploy technology to cycle a refrigerator off for, say, 30 minutes every hour in the middle of the night. You know, A, refrigerator doesn't run that much unless you have teenagers because they're always in there. But B, because shoot, electricity is cheap then, right? But if you're a carbon-dependent utility, like much of North Carolina is, where your base load running at night is pure carbon coal-fired electricity, then there's actually benefit in installing metrics that reduce your nighttime energy use, even though the economists and the financiers would tell you it's not, quote, worth it. Anybody else? I see way back there. Oh, there's a brave soul there.
All right, not bad for a soccer player. Great
Don't
job,
head it.
Karl. So we're a big university community here in North Carolina, and you obviously know the utility situation here, right? Vertically integrated, dominated by one company, typically. What do you think the university system here could do as a community to try to help make changes that will be beneficial both to them, their constituents, their existing students, and their future students, and the community at large?
Yep. I'm a lawyer, so my immediate default answer is understand the law. Your code, utility code, has a definition of what a utility is, someone who provides electric service for a fee. But that does not include a whole lot of the things I was talking about. There's really no way that, for example, a utility can stop you from doing energy efficiency, from improving your energy management, from converting your buildings from silver to gold to platinum LEED. There's nothing a utility can do from aggregating customers for delivery of programs, buy 1,000 LED lights instead of one at a time, and create buyers clubs. Local communities under the law, even in states like this, have local jurisdiction, local rule authority, and you could start moving towards ultimately ideas like community choice aggregation, where the community votes to create a program and creates the funding mechanism. Could be the university, could be the local community. Ideally, it'd be both working in concert, as I described in that slide. So understand what is the utility business and what's not the utility business. Start talking to the entrepreneurs like the independent generators, but also, you know, the independent energy service companies for ways in which you can take on and manage your own programs. It can be scary. You know, I'll tell you, a good CCA, community choice aggregation project, costs about $750,000, $1 million to really develop if you want to go through the full process. But getting that much control over your life is worth it. My county just moved to a CCA for 15 of our communities. By aggregating the people together in an opt-out mechanism for 15 towns in Westchester County, we have our new group, Westchester Power, has the buying power to secure 100% renewable supply and a 1 cent reduction per kilowatt hour, which is not insignificant. And we're going to use that same platform to start delivering low-income energy services, broad-based energy efficiency services, technology purchasing options. There's real power in community. So that's understand what your limits are, push to change them if you need to, but exploit all the freedom that you have, the freedom of movement that you have. There was another one back there and there. We're going to get to you.
Hi, I run a nonprofit in Kentucky. We, among other things, have an on-bill financing program for residential energy efficiency that we do in collaboration with 6 rural electric co-ops that are distribution co-ops. The big systems change that I think I see ahead of us in that is that these co-ops maintain their operations basically on selling kilowatt hours. As efficiency increases, they're going to sell fewer kilowatt hours, but their cost to maintain all those rural lines is not going to go down. We're already seeing increases in base rates instead of increases in kilowatt hour rates. A lot of the future projection on renewables and even on payout on efficiency is based on rising kilowatt hour rates. I think economics are going to cause it to shift the other way. Kilowatt hour rates may even go down. Base rates are definitely going to go up. As a systems thinker in the utility arena, what do you think about that, and how do we accommodate that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about doing this, but then talking about this a little bit but I thought, well, it'll take forever because I get in and for a penny and I stay for a pound. The core principle is absolutely right. Like I said earlier on, coal plants are nothing more than factories for the production of commodity energy, and everything was tuned around this kWh unit of energy machine, just more and more and more and more. But activity-based accounting and cost analysis has revealed that for the distribution company, costs don't vary with units of energy. They vary with numbers of customer, miles of wire, and kilowatts of demand. And if you don't know the difference between kilowatts and kilowatt hours, perhaps some students, you have to learn that because it's part of the lingo, I'm sorry. Another thing you have to get through in my class. So distribution systems are driven by customer kilowatt mile, and they're compensated by the kilowatt hour. And that's causing a breakage as customer demand goes down, as we become more efficient, as building codes improve, and all these other things happen. Ultimately, what we need to do is get to the point where the distribution company, and I say ultimately, is compensated on per customer basis. And then if they're making, let's say, $40 a customer per month, they'll actually have an incentive to encourage energy efficiency because they'll make more profit. Or they can lower that cost if they're a co-op and they're truly focused on their customers. But here's the catch. A whole lot of utilities are making the argument, well, start giving us more money every month from every customer, and we promise we'll be better. This is when you trot out Ronald Reagan and say, trust but verified, right? Because they won't. Monopolists who get a large fixed amount of money won't go after energy efficiency. They'll just also try to turn the crank on more kWh. So in places like New York, where we're promoting and advancing the reforming the energy vision concept, we're saying that first our utilities have to learn to stop being utilities and exclusive providers and move into a world where they're platform providers, where they're enablers of those services in that competition, and from third parties and even with customers exercising control. And once we've transformed them into that different kind of independent distribution system operator, enabler, facilitator, then we can start talking about a compensation scheme that rewards them in line with how their costs accrue. But getting it right in that order is absolutely critical. So look to the places that we're talking about utility of the future proceedings in New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maryland, California, and a couple of other places where we're changing the fundamental nature of the utility so we can get to the point where we can keep them as successful and financially viable entities, but in which they're open to the kind of innovation that we absolutely require. Great question. That gentleman in the back there, Jed, slightly to your left there. Here he is. Now, I'll go for the long bomb there. Oh, that was pretty good.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm a graduate student at University of Colorado Boulder, just going into energy law and energy policy.
Good.
So I was hoping you could give me some recommendations on resources. You listed a couple during your presentation, but if you have some more.
Yeah, check out my Twitter feed at bago Energy. I actually use it as a library for every good study that I've read on value of solar or utility transformation. So I use it, or you could just go to my website, bagoenergy.com, and I have my Twitter feed posted there. I do that because I'm unorganized, and some people actually like reading this stuff. Read anything you can out of the New York Rev. The commission has opened the process up a couple years ago, over 300 stakeholders, and has been issuing comprehensive white papers and opening comment dockets. They're really playing the administrative process game right, a little different than I think the Public Service Commission of Colorado did regarding Boulder, but that's a whole nother discussion. So look at those records as they're developing. Maryland has started another one that's a little closer to home here. Right now, Colorado XL has filed some about 7 projects. Good people like Western Resource Advocates and others will be intervening. Hopefully that record will develop. But the nice thing about them is they're easily organized, they're well cataloged, and you can start reading viewpoints as well as decision documents or staff white papers. In New York Rev, the documentation is huge. The only thing I'll warn you about is that in transforming the utility industry, while we have core issues around things like market structure and rates, it touches so many other issues: low and moderate income customers, large-scale renewables, rate design, lots of other issues that have to be addressed. So if you start sipping from this cup, there's a chance you get hooked on it like me, in which case I'll appreciate the help. Thank you very much again for your attention.